Hello everyone, my name is Thomas White and this is Thomas Writes. I'm back again today with a book haul to kick off the new year. I know it has been quite a while since the new year started, but nevertheless here we are, so thank you for joining me. This is kind of an impromptu book haul because I was in Half Price Books today and there were just so many books that I've been wanting to read that were on the shelves for really cheap, so I just had to pick them up. I will be talking about the books that I picked up at half price, as well as the one ebook that I picked up in this past week as well. With that said, let's get started. The first book that I'm going to talk about is The Forever War by Joe Haldeman. I think that's how you say his name. I've been eager to get into this book because, much like Starship Troopers, this is seen as one of the quintessential military science fiction books. It came out, I believe, in the late 60s or early 70s, and I've heard people describe this to me as the anti-Starship Troopers, in the sense that where Starship Troopers really romanticizes and glorifies war, The Forever War has a much more bleak outlook on war. I recently learned that the author of this book was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and that greatly influenced his writing. And so I'm very curious to see how those real-world influences play into this book. I'm also just on a really big military science fiction kick right now, and I've been wanting to read more books from that subgenre, so I am eager to get into this one in the future. Next up is another sci-fi book by an author that I've already read one book from, and that is The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. Earlier this month, I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, so stay tuned for my review on that. But not to give away too much from that video, but overall, I thought it was a very good book. A little weird in its storytelling, but very thematically rich. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is probably Philip K. Dick's most famous book, but second to that would probably be Man in the High Castle. If you've never heard of this book or the streaming series based on it, the premise is that it is an alternate history set in the 1960s, but in this alternate history, Nazi Germany and Japan won World War II and have occupied the United States of America. And that's all I really know about the story going into it. I love World War II history. I'm a huge history nerd when it comes to the 20th century in general. And I haven't really read any alternative or alternate history before. So I'm very eager to get into this one as, again, this is probably Philip K. Dick's second highest acclaimed book. And I've also heard that this book is a little weird, and I don't know what that is supposed to mean. I've just been told by other people that the book is a little strange, which, having read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, that's not surprising. Philip K. Dick has a very distinct writing style and way of storytelling. So all of that to say, I am eager to get into this book and see what I think of it. Next up is yet another sci-fi book that I've really been wanting to get into, and that is The Martian by Andy Weir. This was turned into a movie with Matt Damon a few years ago that was very highly acclaimed. I actually haven't seen that movie, but from the basic premise of the story, I'm already wanting to read this, because the basic premise is of an astronaut who gets stranded on Mars and has to come up with ways to survive on his own in this abandoned outpost. I'm very curious to see what I think of this one, because right now Andy Weir is probably one of the most popular names in modern science fiction. I know that Project Hail Mary, which is his newest book, has been getting a ton of acclaim, and I figured if I wanted to get into his work, The Martian would be the best place to start. It's funny, because I like the idea of survivor stories, but depending on how they are written, they can be either really compelling or really boring. I'm sorry to any fans of Robinson Crusoe, but I had to do a report on that book back in middle school, and I thought it was one of the most boring books I had ever read. I don't know if this bears any similarities to Robinson Crusoe apart from Guy being stranded in the middle of nowhere. So I'm curious to see if this book intrigues me or bores me, and you will definitely hear my thoughts on this in a future video. The last book I picked up from Half Price is yet another science fiction book. I've just been on a really big science fiction kick lately, so I think that's why I picked all of these up. But the last one that I picked up from Half Price was Foundation by Isaac Asimov. This is a classic science fiction book. It is one of the, no pun intended, foundational books of space opera science fiction. I've heard conflicting things about this series. It seems like people either think that this series is very intriguing and thematically rich, while other people seem to think it is very dry, cold, and boring. So I'm curious to see which camp I will fall into, as I have never read Isaac Asimov before, at least none of his novels. I think I read a couple of his short stories back in college. And if you know about Isaac Asimov, then you know that he is one of the most important authors in science fiction. Between I, Robot and Foundation, the man just heavily influenced the genre overall. I do have to say, though, that with books like this, I hate the little stickers that are like, watch the series now on Apple TV+. It's like, let me read the book and then decide if I want to watch the show or not. I've also heard very mixed things about the show, so I don't know if I will ever check that out at any point. I also don't subscribe to Apple TV+, so I'm not really motivated to watch the show anyway. I've heard that what makes Foundation interesting is that the story takes place literally over thousands of years, and you are following many different characters over this very expansive timeline, which is interesting to me, because if you can see, the book is not that long. And I know there are a couple of other books in the series, and they're also about the same length. So I'm very curious to see how Asimov is able to cover so many characters in what seems like a pretty short page count. I do also have to say that I love the cover art on this book, though. It's just so aesthetically pleasing and gives that good, like, mysterious sci-fi tone off very well. But I'll be sure to put out a review on this book in the future when I'm able to get to it. And then finally is the one Kindle book that I bought, and that is Tress and the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This is Sanderson's first secret project that he put together over the course of the pandemic. I know that the book is set in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere, which technically this would be my first Cosmere book that I have read. I haven't read Mistborn yet. I haven't read The Way of Kings yet. So this is my introduction to the Cosmere, which I'm curious to see how Brandon Sanderson fans react to that. Because from what I read online, this book is pretty disconnected from the rest of the Cosmere, so it shouldn't affect my views of Mistborn or The Way of Kings. I actually started reading this book last week, and I'm about a third of the way through it, and I have to say that already I am very, very invested. Brandon Sanderson's writing style is just very appealing to me because he writes very good, compelling characters that have a lot of quirks. I also just really enjoy his sense of humor. It's very childish, but not in a way that's annoying. It's in a way that's very charming. The advertising for this book compares it a lot to The Princess Bride, and normally I get a little irritated when publishers try to advertise a book as being like The Princess Bride, because that movie, and I assume the book, I haven't read the book, has a very specific sense of humor that is very hard to replicate. But I will say that this book definitely lives up to that hype so far. The humor has been very solid. You can tell it's meant to be very tongue-in-cheek and is meant to subvert a lot of tropes of classic fairy tales. It's also just paced very well. There hasn't been a dull moment so far. So that will probably be the book that I review next after Blade Runner. So stay tuned for that once I finish this book. But that is all the books that I picked up in my New Year book haul. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and that you stick around to see what I think of these books as I read through them. Thank you guys again for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next video.